The war in South Vietnam depended on movement. Every unit, large or small, had to shift through thick jungle, avoid detection, and reach its target without losing its trail. For the Viet Cong, this meant relying on scouts who could read the terrain like a living map. Among them were women who had grown up in the villages along the Ho Chi Minh trail systems, women who knew the sound of each bird, the pattern of each stream, and the way a single broken leaf could reveal a soldier's passing. These female scouts became some of the most trusted guides in the VC network. Their job was simple on paper: move ahead, read the ground, warn the unit of danger. But in reality, it demanded steady nerves, extreme patience, and the ability to stay calm when every shadow looked like a threat. Their training started early. Many were teenagers when local cadres identified natural talent, sharp eyesight, strong memory, quiet step. They were taught basic fieldcraft: how to test soil moisture, how to feel for fresh tracks with bare fingertips, how to break a branch at a precise angle that signaled danger to those behind them. They learned to judge the age of footprints by the firmness of the edges. They memorized boot patterns used by Americans, ARVN forces, regional militias, and even different VC units. And they learned to hide their own movement. Step on the ball of the foot first. Roll weight forward. Avoid roots that snap. Sleep lightly. Listen more than speak. By the late 1960s, these scouts had become the early warning system for many VC companies operating near Phuoc Thi province. They moved ahead of supply runs, guided small reconnaissance teams, and monitored Australian and American patrol routes. Many believed they understood the enemy well. American infantry moved heavily and talked too loudly. ARVN units stayed close to trails. South Korean forces moved fast but left strong scent trails because of their rations. Even the local militias had predictable rhythms. Then the Australians arrived. At first, the female scouts didn't think much of them. They saw them as another foreign force, tall, confident, burdened with heavy packs. But these Australians, especially the men from the Special Air Service Regiment, behaved differently from the troops the scouts were used to tracking. The first signs were small. A scout would scan a trail and find almost nothing: no heavy boot prints, no dragged gear, no crushed ferns, yet the bushes looked disturbed. A single thread of spiderweb broken at chest height, a leaf flipped back with its wet underside exposed. These were hints, but they didn't match the movement patterns of conventional forces. Scouts reported them anyway, but commanders dismissed it. Probably an animal, they were told, or a small VC unit using new movement drills. But as the months went on, the hints grew stranger. One scout found footprints spaced unusually far apart, as if the walker was taking deliberate, measured steps. Another found a shallow depression where someone had knelt for hours, watching a trail but left no trash, no scent of cigarettes, no obvious sign of occupation. When she tried to follow the tracks, they vanished within a few meters. It was as though the unknown patrol had stepped off the earth. Female scouts prided themselves on being patient. They could stand still for minutes, even hours if needed. But the SAS could remain still for half a day, hidden under roots or behind tree trunks. Scouts often walked past them without realizing they were being watched. That was the beginning of the fear. One day, a young scout named Lan led a VC platoon through a narrow bamboo corridor. She moved cautiously, scanning for any unusual sign. About an hour into the march, she froze. She saw a footprint, but it wasn't fresh. Or was it? The edges were sharp, which suggested hours, not days. But the soil below it was firm, not soft, which made no sense. She checked again. The spacing between prints indicated a tall man, moving slowly, carefully. But then the trail ended. No branch snapped, no leaf disturbed. It just stopped. She felt a prickle run across her neck. Something was wrong. When she reported this to her commander, he frowned. "Americans don't move like that," he said. "Maybe ARVN Rangers." But she shook her head. She had tracked them before. This was different. Other scouts began reporting similar experiences. They could always track American patrols. Americans breathed heavily, stepped on branches, left rations on the ground. But something new was moving in the jungle, silent, precise, and invisible. The female scouts doubled their vigilance. They spaced themselves farther apart. They used new hand signals. They paused longer between each movement, but the signs continued. A path that looked untouched except for one single scuff mark, a clump of grass bent ever so slightly. A line of ants disrupted, then reformed. These details were tiny, but to trained scouts, they meant something. Someone was out there who understood the jungle better than they did. Then came the first disappearance. A female scout named Huang was leading a reconnaissance team near the long green area. She moved ahead while the 7 men behind her waited for her signal. She stepped into a clearing, scanned the tree line, and disappeared from sight for less than 20 seconds. When the team followed, they found her pack lying on the ground. No signs of struggle, no blood, just the pack placed neatly, almost respectfully. Huang was never seen again. Fear spread quickly. Some whispered that the Australians captured her. Others believed she stepped on a trap. But the older scouts knew the truth. She had been watched long before she realized it. The female scouts now approached every patrol with caution bordering on dread. They sensed when the jungle felt wrong. Silence that was too complete. Air that felt too still. A subtle change in the pattern of light through the leaves. These were things only experienced scouts noticed. And each time they felt it, they knew what it meant. The Australians were near. Their confidence, once strong, started to crack. They had been the masters of stealth. Now they realized someone else moved more quietly, more patiently, and with greater discipline than they had ever imagined. This was the beginning of the shift. The rise of fear came slowly, like mist rising from the forest floor. And for the first time, these skilled trackers felt a sense of being hunted themselves. The first real contact between female Viet Cong scouts and the Australian SAS didn't start with gunfire. It began with unease, tiny warnings only the most attentive scouts could feel. The jungle felt different when the SAS moved through it. The air seemed heavier. Even the insects seemed quieter. No one could explain why. But the scouts sensed it long before they saw anything. One early morning, a scout named Mai was leading a squad toward a supply cache hidden near a creek bed. The sun had barely risen. Mist clung low, weaving between the trees like pale smoke. Mai scanned the ground for tracks. She noticed something unusual, just a single leaf turned upside down. Its wet underside faced the sky. She crouched. The leaf was still damp. Fresh, someone had brushed it only minutes earlier. She held up a clenched fist, freezing the squad. They stopped instantly, rifles ready. Mai listened. Nothing. Not even a bird call. Her stomach tightened. She motioned the men to pull back. They retreated 10 steps, then 20. The ambush they expected never came. To the squad, it seemed like a false alarm, but Mai couldn't shake the feeling. Someone had been watching. Someone who could have attacked but chose not to. That choice frightened her more than any firefight would have. The SAS didn't strike unless they needed to. They let patrols pass, learned their patterns, and reported back. The scouts didn't realize they were part of a larger intelligence picture, one where their behavior was being studied, measured, and anticipated. Another scout, older and more seasoned, was named Dung. She had tracked French soldiers years before. She thought she had seen every trick, false trails, backward walking, even men wearing sandals to mimic villagers. But nothing prepared her for the Australian silence. She first encountered them along a narrow ridgeline. Her job was simple: ensure the path ahead was safe for a weapons convoy. She moved slowly, carefully. Every 20 meters she paused to listen. That day, the forest seemed normal. Birds chirped, cicadas buzzed. A soft breeze rustled the treetops. She relaxed slightly. Then she stepped forward and heard a soft click behind her. She spun, rifle raised. Nothing, just trees and mist. But she sensed eyes on her. For almost a full minute she stood perfectly still. She felt her pulse rising, her breathing growing fast. Then, with steady effort, she backed away step by step. When she reached the convoy behind her, she ordered them to halt and take an alternate route. The next morning, another scout team went to investigate. They found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no disturbed soil, but they found one thing that confirmed Dung's fear. A short length of fishing line ran between two low bushes. Attached to it was a small, simple early warning device made from a tin pellet and bamboo. It was a reconnaissance alarm, quiet, nearly invisible, and placed with surgical precision. Dung realized an enemy patrol had been there ahead of her. They had known she was coming. The Australians didn't behave like Americans. They didn't march loudly in straight lines. They didn't smoke as they walked. They didn't break cover unnecessarily. They moved in small groups, usually 4 to 6 men. Each man stayed 5 to 10 meters apart. Their footsteps matched the rhythm of the jungle, not the rhythm of a soldier. To a scout, this was terrifying. They were used to predictable enemies. The SAS were not predictable. A few weeks later, a fatal encounter confirmed everything the scouts feared. A patrol of female scouts was guiding a VC platoon near a steep hillside. The lead scout, Ha, noticed a faint mark on a tree trunk, just a small scrape, pale wood showing through dark bark. She recognized it as unnatural. She signaled for the platoon to halt. She advanced alone, scanning her surroundings. She checked the ground, nothing. She checked the undergrowth, nothing. She checked the treetops, still nothing. But the SAS were already there. 2 men lay belly down behind a fallen log 5 meters away, hidden under dense netting and mud. Another sat perfectly still against a tree trunk, covered in camouflage so effective he looked like part of the bark. They had watched Ha approach for nearly 2 minutes, marking her patience, her skill, and her discipline. But they also noted her flaws. She scanned too high, looked too wide, and failed to check her immediate flank. When she stepped within 3 meters of their firing lane, the lead SAS scout made a quick hand signal. No gunshot followed. Not yet. The Australians were gathering intelligence, not bodies. They waited for more VC soldiers to reveal themselves. Behind Ha, the platoon grew restless. They whispered among themselves. A young soldier shifted his foot. The sound was tiny but enough. A twig snapped. Ha froze. The SAS scout tensed. Ha heard it too, but she assumed it came from her own men. She turned her head slightly and made a sharp motion for them to be quiet. That small movement gave the SAS their window. One Australian rose silently from the ground, stepped forward, and seized Ha from behind in a lightning-fast motion. His hand clamped over her mouth. She kicked, but another trooper grabbed her legs. She was dragged behind the log as easily as if she were a bundle of bamboo. The platoon never saw her again. The Australians melted back into the trees before anyone fired a shot. When the platoon advanced seconds later, they found only silence. This was the moment fear turned into certainty. The SAS weren't just hard to track, they were hunters. Word spread quickly through VC ranks. Female scouts, once confident and calm, now triple-checked every movement. They walked slower. They listened longer. They warned units to expect contact even when they weren't sure. But the anxiety was there, constant, pressing like humidity. For the first time, these scouts realized someone was outmatching them in their own environment. They weren't just being followed. They were being studied. Their strengths were being observed. Their habits were being exploited. I summed it up best one evening after a long patrol. She whispered to her commander, "They move the way we used to think only we could." The commander replied quietly, "Then we must assume they already know our next steps." And for the rest of the war, many scouts carried that fear with them every time they entered the jungle. By the time the dry season settled over Phuoc Thai province, the female VC scouts had learned to respect the Australians. But respect was different from fear. Fear came later, during a 5-day pursuit that tested everything the scouts believed they were good at. It began with a simple mission. A reinforced VC company needed to move between 2 base areas deep in the jungle. They planned to travel along a narrow corridor of thick vegetation where the canopy hung low and the ground stayed soft. The scouts assumed that the Australian SAS would never follow them so far off regular trails. They were wrong. The lead scout for the march was Kai, a woman known for her steady nerves. She walked with quiet confidence, scanning ahead for trip wires and disturbed soil. Two other female scouts, Lian and Tam, served as flankers. They moved 20 to 30 meters out, checking for signs of ambush. The company behind them carried weapons, rice, and ammunition. Their footsteps were soft but steady. But from the first hour of their movement, Kai sensed something was off. The jungle felt heavy, too still. She listened for the usual markers, bird calls, buzzing insects, rustling leaves, but the soundscape felt thin. She couldn't explain it. She just knew something was wrong. By midday, she found the first sign. A shallow footprint on the edge of a swampy patch. It was old, maybe a day or two, but the pattern didn't match any local unit. She knelt, touched the edge, and felt the firmness. Whoever walked there had moved slowly, spreading body weight carefully so the print barely showed. SAS, she whispered. Her commander frowned. They're far from their patrol zone. Maybe not, Kai replied. The company pressed on. Spacing opened up. The soldiers became quieter. Chico, the company's best marksman, walked with his finger on the trigger. The scouts grew more alert. They checked for anything: broken twigs, shifted leaves, crushed grass. But the SAS left almost nothing. Behind the VC column, half a kilometer away, a six-man SAS patrol shadowed them with ghost-like precision. The Australians had picked up the VC trail 2 days earlier and had been watching them ever since. They matched the pace, kept distance, and communicated only with hand signals. Their patrol commander, Corporal Harris, had two priorities: gather intelligence and stay unseen. He reminded his men constantly, no noise, no silhouette, no hurry, let them show us the way. The SAS moved in a staggered single file. Each man stayed 10 meters apart, eyes sweeping slowly, rifles angled high. They walked heel first on firm ground, ball first on soft earth. When they rested, they leaned into trees to avoid leaving body imprints. Harris often paused, raised his hand, and listened. If he heard nothing unusual, he listened longer. Patience was their weapon. On the second day, Kai found another sign. A vine had been cut cleanly with a blade sharper than most VC machetes. She felt the sap, still sticky. Hours old, she muttered. They're moving behind us. Lian, one of the flank scouts, grew uneasy. Why don't they attack? Kai shook her head. Because they want something else. Day 3 brought tighter tension. The VC company adjusted tactics: shorter spacing, more frequent halts, and longer listening pauses. Scouts took turns staying behind to watch their own trail. They stared into thick brush, waiting for movement. Nothing came, but they felt watched every minute. The SAS were there. They just chose not to be seen. Once in mid-afternoon, two flank scouts stopped suddenly. They thought they heard breathing. Slow, controlled, deliberate breathing. They dropped to the ground, rifles up. The whole company froze. The breathing stopped. They scanned for minutes. Sweat rolled down their faces, but they found nothing. When they moved again, they walked softer than before. That evening, the company set up a temporary lay-up area on a ridge. The scouts created a perimeter and sat silently in the dark. They chewed cold rice from cloth bundles, drank from canteens, and waited for sleep to take them. Far behind them, the SAS ate silently too, hard biscuits and water. Harris unfolded a small map and whispered, "They'll move north tomorrow, we stay with them." He didn't know it, but Kai had predicted the same thing. Day 4 tested both sides. Heat settled under the canopy like a heavy blanket. Sweat-soaked uniforms, mosquitoes swarmed. Kai forced herself to concentrate. Every 10 minutes, she scanned high into the branches, then low across the ground. Just before noon, she found a disturbed patch of moss. She crouched, touched it, and felt that the top layer was still cool, fresh. She signaled a halt. The company knelt. Not a sound. After 2 full minutes, she raised her fist again. Move. She knew they were being hunted. What she didn't know was how close the Australians were. At that moment, Harris's point man lay not 20 meters away, face pressed into the soil. watching the VC movement through a small hole in the foliage. He barely blinked. Sweat rolled into his eyes, but he let it fall. He watched Kai's hand signals, memorizing her movements. Her discipline impressed him. "She's good," he whispered later to Harris. "Very good." By late afternoon, the VC company approached a narrow creek. The scouts crossed one by one, stepping on stones to avoid tracks. When the last soldier passed, Kai doubled back to erase marks. She brushed leaves, patted soil, and used a branch to wipe prints. It was flawless work, but Harris had already recorded their route on a mental map. He didn't need their footprints. He needed their direction, pace, and habits. That night the VC slept lightly. Every rustle made them flinch. A branch cracked in the distance. A man jolted awake, heart pounding, but it was just a monkey. On the fifth day, the pressure broke. The VC had planned to reach a hidden base by noon, but the scouts kept delaying. Every time Kai felt something wrong, she halted the whole column. The men grew frustrated. Their legs ached. They whispered that the scouts were becoming too cautious. Then mid-morning, Leon spotted it. A human shape, just a silhouette, low, still, hidden in shade. She blinked. It vanished. She signaled frantically. Kai rushed over, breath tight. She scanned the area. Nothing. Leon whispered he was right there. "I saw him." Kai didn't doubt her. SAS. The company commander ordered an immediate course change west into denser terrain, but Harris anticipated this. The SAS shifted with quiet precision, blocking the new route without ever firing a shot. They held positions for hours, watching the VC funnel themselves into a predictable path. By late afternoon, the VC realized the truth. They weren't escaping the Australians. They were being guided by them, herded, directed. Kai's face went pale when she understood. "They know our patterns. They know how we react. They're shaping our path." For the first time in her career, Kai felt deep, genuine fear, not from bullets, but from being outplayed by men who seemed to read her mind. That night, the SAS finally broke contact voluntarily. Their mission was complete. They had tracked, studied, and mapped the entire VC company without being detected. The VC reached base exhausted, shaken, and quiet. The female scouts sat together, replaying each moment. They realized they had been watched for 5 days straight and never once saw their enemy clearly. From that week on, their training changed. Their confidence changed. Their understanding of the jungle changed. And their fear of the Australian SAS became permanent. The female Viet Cong scouts were not the type to accept defeat quietly. After the 5-day ordeal in Phuoc Thai, the whispers spread through base areas and district units. The Australians had outplayed them. They had followed a full company, controlled the pace, predicted every turn, and never once exposed themselves. For scouts who had built their reputation on navigating and surviving the jungle, the humiliation was sharp. So the scouts changed. They adapted. They prepared to fight back. The next month saw new training sessions deep in hidden camps. The scouts studied Australian tactics the same way they once studied American patrol habits. They built small lessons from every scrap of information. Spacing, pacing, break points, preferred ambush sites, even the tiny signs left behind, like the faint smell of gun oil or the rare footprint from foreign boots. Kai, who had led the company through the long pursuit, became the spearhead of these reforms. She gathered older scouts, including Mai, Dung, and Leon, and led detailed briefings. They used sticks to draw maps in the dirt, marked high ground with stones, and showed where the Australians would likely move next time. "We treat them like they treated us," Kai said. "We watch them, we predict them, we learn how they think." But that was easier said than done. The first step was improving counter-tracking skills. The scouts practiced walking on logs, rocks, and roots, anything that avoided disturbing the soil. They smoothed ground behind them with leafy branches. They stepped in the footprints of those ahead to reduce track count. They even changed their spacing to confuse estimations of unit size. But the Australians had already learned these tricks during years of jungle warfare training. Counter-tracking alone wasn't enough. Next, the scouts increased their use of deception. They created false trails by dragging branches, planting misleading footprints, and weaving through streams for longer distances. Some patrols walked backward for short bursts, a trick often used against South Vietnamese Rangers. But the SAS recognized these signs immediately. They saw through the deceptions as easily as reading a map. The Australians rarely fell for simple tricks, so the scouts escalated. They began setting ambushes specifically for the SAS, small, silent, and ultra-short range. They built firing positions that were nearly invisible, shallow depressions lined with leaves, low walls of branches, and firing slits cut into rotting logs. And because they knew the SAS favored stealth over aggression, the scouts targeted choke points where even elite patrols had limited options. Narrow creeks, steep animal tracks, and fallen bamboo tangles. One morning, Kai led a 7-woman scout group to test their new tactics. They selected a narrow notch between two ridges where the canopy hung low. They placed silent signals, leaf markers, bent grasses, and faint scratches meant to lure trackers into the kill zone. Then they waited for 3 hours, 4, 5. Around mid-afternoon, Kai tensed. A faint vibration trembled through the soil. Someone was approaching. She scanned the shadows. Nothing moved. But the forest had changed, gone quiet as it always did when the SAS entered an area. Her heart rate quickened. She signaled her team. They steadied rifles. They held their breath. A branch shifted softly. Then a small shape appeared, a long-tailed macaque pushing through leaves. The scouts exhaled. False alarm, but the feeling of presence didn't go away. By sunset, Kai made the call. "We leave, now." They withdrew carefully, covering their tracks as they went. What they didn't know was that a 4-man SAS patrol had indeed been watching, just from farther out than expected. The Australians had spotted the false signs early and avoided the ambush zone entirely. They circled around it, studied it from the flanks, and melted away before the scouts even realized they'd been outmaneuvered again. The lesson hit hard. The next attempt came days later. This time, the scouts picked a water crossing. They knew the Australians sometimes watched from upstream, using the sound of running water to mask their movements. So the scouts created a false crossing point, footprints leading down to a sandy bank, a few bits of debris placed as if a group had rested there. Then they hid in the undergrowth nearby. 2 scouts lay flat beneath ferns, rifles pointed toward likely observation points. Others positioned themselves behind thick trees. The trap was smart. It relied on subtle detail, not noise or explosives. But the SAS didn't take the bait. Instead, they inspected the false crossing from nearly 50 meters away, using slow, deliberate movements and the terrain to stay invisible. They noticed something wrong. The spacing of the footprints was too even. Real soldiers crossing water would vary their stride. The footprints looked placed, not used. So the Australians backed away, using a long route that brought them behind the scouts' position. They never fired, they never made contact. They just watched, memorized, and left. When the scouts realized they'd been bypassed again, frustration spread like fever. "How can we set a trap?" Leon muttered. "For men who don't step where we want them to?" Kai didn't answer. She just stared into the jungle, the fear settling deeper. Still, the scouts refused to give up. They changed patterns. They moved at irregular hours, midnight, dawn, and even during heavy rain. They split into smaller teams. They created new signals and dropped old ones. They set Claymore-style explosive traps using captured materials. They even began walking long distances barefoot to eliminate boot print giveaways. But the Australians continued to adapt faster. They changed routes. They shifted pace. They doubled back unexpectedly. Sometimes they followed the scouts. Sometimes they circled far around them. Sometimes they disappeared entirely, leaving no trace for days. One of the toughest moments came when Mai, typically calm, experienced what felt like a brush with death. She was checking a ridge line just before dusk when she felt a breeze, cool, quick, and unnatural, as if something had cut through the air behind her. She turned fast, rifle raised. There between two trees a faint shape moved, just a shadow, but the movement was smooth, controlled, the kind that only trained soldiers produced. I stepped forward cautiously, but the shape was gone. Later, she found a single boot scuff, one that hadn't been there earlier. She sat down, breath shallow, and realized she had almost walked into the hands of a man who had chosen not to take her. That choice was worse than combat. It meant the Australians were studying her, watching her, learning her habits the same way she tried learning theirs. By the end of the month, the female scouts understood a harsh reality. No matter how much they improved, no matter how many tricks they learned, the SAS were still one step ahead. Not because of luck, not because of magic, but because the Australians were disciplined, patient, and overwhelmingly skilled at jungle warfare. The scouts weren't just fighting men. They were fighting a system, training, mindset, and doctrine honed specifically for environments like this. Still, they didn't stop trying. But now, each time they set a trap, each time they moved through dark jungle, each time they sensed silence settle around them, a single thought returned. Are they watching us right now? The last days of the long hunt began before sunrise. A cold mist clung to the treetops, and the Australian SAS patrol lay silent in a tight harbor, checking gear by touch alone. Every man knew the routine. Every movement was slow, controlled, deliberate. After nearly a week tracking the same Viet Cong formation, the patrol was worn down but focused. Their job was simple on paper: stay close, watch everything, stay unseen. Then pass the information to the infantry and artillery waiting miles behind them. But simple didn't mean easy. In these final hours, the air felt heavier. The jungle seemed to lean in. Even the birds were quiet. Experience told them the Viet Cong often became restless at this stage. When they realized they'd been shadowed for days, they tightened their perimeter. They doubled their listening posts. And they sent out their most trusted scouts, many of them young women trained to move through the bush with almost unnatural silence. These scouts were feared for a reason. They were patient, calm, and incredibly sharp. But after facing the Australians for so long, they had also learned caution. And that caution, by now, had turned into something closer to fear. The patrol leader signaled, "Time to move." They rose and slipped into the trees, spaced 10 meters apart. No talking, no branches snapping. Every footfall was placed with intention. For the SAS, this level of control was second nature. For the enemy scouts, it was a nightmare. They were used to tracking noisy American units or local South Vietnamese militias who moved in groups too large to hide. But the Australians were different. Their patrols were small. Their pace was unpredictable. Their trails vanished quickly. The Viet Cong had a nickname for them: the ghosts in the long grass. By mid-morning, the SAS came across new signs: footprints, cooking ash still warm, palm fronds used as improvised bedding. The VC scouts had camped lightly, likely unsure of how close the Australians actually were. The truth was unsettling. The SAS had been within 200 meters throughout the night. The patrol eased forward, using the terrain as cover. High ground was always an advantage. Fallen bamboo gave concealment. Vines masked silhouettes. These little choices kept them unseen. Meanwhile, the female VC scouts made their own calculations. They moved fast, checking routes, examining trails, listening for clues. One scout crouched at a creek bed, scanning the mud for boot prints. She found one, but only one. That was typical of the SAS. They rarely left a full trail. One misplaced step, one moment of softness in the ground, that was all the enemy ever got. It frustrated them. It made them uneasy. They began to work in pairs instead of alone. They whispered more often. They paused to listen, holding their breath. The SAS patrol reached a ridge overlooking the main Viet Cong track. Below them, the enemy division was on the move. Hundreds of soldiers, weapons slung, stepping carefully through the jungle. The Australians watched through binoculars, recording numbers, equipment types, and formation spacing. It was valuable intelligence, the kind that could redirect a whole battalion. But the real pressure came from the scouts. The Australians knew the Viet Cong were looking for them, and if one scout got lucky, the entire division could pivot and chase them down. Still, the SAS relied on discipline. They never stayed in one place. They never repeated patterns. When they stopped in dead ground. When they moved with the terrain's natural rhythm. It was mentally exhausting. Every sound mattered. Every smell, every shift in the wind. Hyper-awareness was the only thing keeping them alive. Late in the afternoon, everything tightened. A faint rustle drifted through the underbrush. The patrol froze. Seconds passed. A small figure emerged, one of the VC female scouts creeping forward, scanning the ridge. She was cautious, but she wasn't cautious enough for what waited above her. The SAS scout closest to her remained motionless. His camouflage blended perfectly with the foliage. The Viet Cong girl paused, staring directly at him. The distance between them was less than 20 meters. She didn't blink, and neither did he. She saw nothing. Eventually she backed away, signaling to the partner behind her. They retreated slowly, tension in every step. That moment became one of many reasons why Viet Cong scouts learned to fear these unseen Australians. They couldn't detect them, even when staring straight at them. As dusk approached, the SAS moved toward their extraction point. They had tracked the enemy for 5 days. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and carrying loads that cut into their shoulders. But they were intact. Their mission was complete. The Viet Cong division, however, was unsettled. Their scouts reported almost nothing. No clear tracks, no clear direction, just faint signs of a presence they couldn't place. Rumors spread through the ranks. Some whispered that the Australians could smell movement. Others said they could climb trees without leaving marks. None of it was true, of course. It was simply discipline, patience, and training. But fear grows easily in the jungle. When the SAS finally linked up with the helicopter for extraction, they kept their heads low as the rotor wash blasted dust and leaves across the LZ. They boarded fast, lifting out just as the sun sank behind the tree line. The mission ended quietly, the way most of their missions did. No big firefight, no dramatic chase, just a clean exfil and a burst of relief as the aircraft banked toward base. Back in camp, the debrief painted a clear picture. Because of their tracking, Australian artillery and infantry intercepted parts of the Viet Cong force days later. Lives were saved, routes were changed, operations were adjusted. But the real story, the human story, lay in the minds of those scouts in the jungle. Australian SAS patrols didn't just outmaneuver them. They shifted their confidence. They forced them to move slower, to second-guess themselves, to look over their shoulders. Fear is a powerful thing in war, and in this case, it was earned the hard way. For the SAS troopers, the mission was just another example of how small patrols could influence large battles. They trusted each other. They trusted their training, and they trusted silence. And in the thick jungle of Vietnam, that silence became its own weapon, one the Viet Cong never forgot.